people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Ahead of their upcoming September 10th grudge match, their showdown, Clarissa Shields, me and Marshall can both activate a rematch clause.
You know, I don't know which two fighters set to fight on this card hate each other more.
Alicia Baumgartner and Michaela Mayer, or Clarissa Shields and Savannah Marshall. The amateur loss to Marshall is the only blemish suffered by Shields in the squared circle. The odds makers have listed Marshall as a slight favorite to win the fight. She holds the big advantage in power, while Shields is viewed as the quicker and more technical fighter. During a recent interview, Shields revealed that both her and Marshall have the ability to exercise the option for an immediate rematch. Shields is predicting a win so dominant that Marshall will be reluctant to have a second encounter. And she's not off base. She's not off base in the sense that if the fight is one-sided in either direction, either for Marshall or for Shields, rematch clause and all, the other fighter may choose not to activate it.
If it's a dominant points decision win, the way it was in the Hammer fight or the DeCare fight, more recently the Emma Kozin fight.
It's hard to imagine that Savannah would so choose to exercise the rematch clause, and the same is true in reverse. If Savannah Marshall lays a systematic beating on Clarissa Shields like the one she laid out to Hannah Rankin, more recently to Femke Hermans, it's hard to imagine that Clarissa would go back in there to receive another one. There's a rematch clause in the contract. It's there. Shields told Sports Mail. We can both activate it after the fight. I'm not worried about it. We had a rematch clause when I fought against Christina Hammer. She never activated it. It is what it is. It's going to be her losing because I'm not going to lose. You can note that. And everybody can ask if or when or how. I'm going to win by any means necessary. Period. Shields won a lopsided decision over Emma Kozin back in February. Marshall picked up a brutal 3-round stoppage of Femke Hermans in April, and I reiterate, she's not off base. She's not wrong. You can put a rematch clause, a two-way rematch clause, into the contract that empowers either fighter to activate it if they lose, though ultimately, whether or not the rematch actually happens is contingent upon other factors. The aesthetic of the match, the aesthetic of the first fight. Was it competitive?
No, Batman.
Was it competitive enough that people would actually want to see a second fight? Because lest we forget, boxing is a sport, but it's also a business. For you to do a second fight, there has to actually be a market for it. And that market is contingent upon whether or not the first fight was aesthetically pleasing. Was it competitive enough, exciting enough, thrilling enough that people would want to see them run it back?
Think Amir Khan versus Kell Brook.
I told you, in spite of all the initial bellyaching the fight received when it was first announced, that commercially, at the box office and at the gate, the fight would be successful, though them incorporating a rematch clause into the contract, it doesn't necessarily guarantee a second fight. It all depends on how the first fight looks. Amir Khan had the option of exercising his rematch clause in that fight, but he chose not to, and you saw how the fight looked. You saw why. He got the brakes beat off of him by Kell Brook.
Any one of these two girls gets the brakes beat off of them by the other, there's not much chance they exercise a rematch clause. A demoralizing beating is just that.
Demoralizing, hurting the fighter's morale and their belief in their self that they could perhaps do better in a second fight than they did in the first. But if the fight is close, if the fight is competitive, or if the fight's outcome is controversial, that would warrant a second fight. That would warrant a rematch. Scenarios where I could see a second fight is
knockout.
If Savannah Marshall were to go in there and get an early knockout, say in the first or second round, I could see a rematch happening in those circumstances. But if the fight ends up being a systematic beating, where Savannah Marshall lays systematic punishment on Clarissa Shields, round by round, landing hard shots.
Think Wilder versus Fury 2 and 3.
If it's one-sided for either fighter in either direction, I don't see a rematch happening. I don't see a second fight taking place. There's a lot on the line for these fighters. I'd wager that a loss might hurt Clarissa a lot more than it hurts Savannah, because Savannah's not the decorated amateur, the double gold medalist, the two-time undisputed champion. Her stock really doesn't take as big a hit if she loses this thing as Clarissa does.
Let's not pretend that these two fighters compose themselves the same way. They don't.
They don't call Savannah Marshall the silent assassin for no reason. She's not a woman of very many words, whereas Clarissa Shields, she's always got a lot to say. The self-dubbed greatest woman of all time. Just imagine if she goes out the way that Femke Hermans went out, the way that Hannah Rankin went out. Savannah Marshall is a big puncher, perhaps the biggest puncher anywhere at or around these weights, stopping fighters that have never been stopped.
Experienced fighters that have taken on other experienced fighters. These ain't squirrely amateurs she's knocking off.
If you're going to be objective about the situation, whose stock does it really hurt more? Savannah Marshall's or Clarissa Shields? There's no shame in losing to one of the top 2, top 3 pound-for-pound women in the sport, should things go sideways for Savannah. But if Savannah unseats Clarissa as this division's undisputed champion...
I mean, think about it. If Savannah were to lose, she could always move up and wait and take on Franchon Cruz for all her belts.
I mean, say she loses to Clarissa, she could always take on Franchon Cruz, she could always take on Aline Cedar-Ruz or Christina Hammer. She's got options, whereas Clarissa, she's already been there and done that with a lot of the fighters that campaign at these weights. If she loses to Savannah...
She already beat Franchon Cruz in her professional debut. She already beat Hannah Gabriels and Christina Hammer.
She already beat Marie-Eve Dicaire. She already beat Hannah Rankin. Those are 2 alphabet titleists, alphabet champions at junior middleweight. For the most part, Clarissa has been there and done that with most of the noteworthy fighters at or around these weights. She loses to Savannah. Where does she go from there?
Clarissa Shields herself may not be willing to entertain a scenario where she loses to Savannah Marshall.
But there is a first time for everything, isn't there? And Savannah's not an unfamiliar territory. She swapped punches with some of the same fighters as Clarissa Shields, and lest we forget, she's beaten her before. It was some time ago, and they were younger women than they are now. But Savannah's only gained more experience and more punching power since then. It's a fascinating fight, and who's gonna win? Well, there's only one way to find out.
September 10th, somebody's O has got to go.
In men's featherweight news, a surprising revelation per a tweet from Michael Benson. The WBA have reportedly now insisted that Leo Santa Cruz must defend his WBA featherweight world title versus Lee Wood next, and denied a Ray Vargas unification. It's claimed Santa Cruz has been given 24 hours to confirm whether or not he will accept the Wood fight. That bit of it, him petitioning to unify titles with Ray Vargas, knowing that he has an outstanding mandatory that predates Ray Vargas's decision win over Mark Magsayo.
That's what I was expecting. That's what everybody was expecting, Eddie Hearn included.
Leo Santa Cruz has always seemed like a fighter who's in pretty tight with the WBA. The WBA that has allowed him to hang on to a featherweight title for approximately 3.5 years now, having not boxed as a featherweight in 3.5 years.
Kansu should have been elevated to full WBA champion a long time ago.
It was a time when Eddie Hearn was attempting to make a Kansu versus Josh Warrington unification match, but the problem was that Kansu, he wasn't the full WBA champion. Thus, the IBF would not approve of Warrington versus Zhu as a unification bout. Thus, Josh was under orders to satisfy his mandatory challenger, at which point Josh vacated the title, and the rest is history.
The title went to Kid Galahad, who lost it to Kiko Martinez,
who then lost it to Josh Warrington. Josh, who vacated the title in the first place.
Kansu, he lost his WBA Reggie belt to Lee Wood.
Lee Wood, who's coming off a career-best win, a career-best performance over then unbeaten Olympian Mick Conlan. Knocked him out of the fucking ring in that fight, and was a fight of the year candidate. Lee Wood's been busy. He's been having stellar performances. The dominant victory over Kansu and the dominant knockout win over Mick Conlan.
Oh, the fight was competitive throughout, but that knockout win,
that did it. That sealed the deal and removed all doubts. Lee Wood has been left in limbo ever since, waiting for the WBA to do their job. Lee Wood, who very recently took to social media and stated, Josh Warrington, see, your jaw is healed nicely, and it's constantly talking shit. You're still concussed from Lara if you think you'll stop me. If you're still looking at me in 6 rounds, guess what?
It looks a lot like Lee Wood was trying to goad Josh Warrington into a title fight because the WBA was dragging their feet to do their job.
Dragging their feet to issue out this order to Leo Santa Cruz to thereby satisfy his mandatory challenger, Lee Wood. And it's about time.
Though as far as time, I think timing has a lot to do with why they did this.
At this time, there is a separate story involving court documents that seem to indicate nefarious business practices by way of the WBA. The WBA, the same WBA that was in hot water last year, may find themselves in hot water again this year, since these court documents seem to indicate
bribery.
Fighters achieving ranks by way of financial incentives issued to WBA lobbyists and officials. That's the gist of it. And because the WBA already found themselves in hot water last year with the Alphabet Commission for their proliferation of secondary trinket titles and baby belts, interim, Reggie.
Because they already found themselves in hot water last year, and they may find themselves in hot water again this year, that's why I think they're finally deciding to do their job.
Timing is everything. And the timing of this 24-hour deadline is impeccable, to say the least, because it's coming at a time where the WBA may once again find themselves under investigation, find themselves in some hot water.
You want that Lee Wood should start complaining to the powers that be that you're not doing your job?
Is that what you need right now? A fighter raising a stink. A fighter that's been paying his sanctioning fees, that's how he's got that WBA regular title, waiting for his title shot that you're not giving him. Is that what the WBA, Gilberto Mendoza, and all his associates, is that what they need right now? I don't think so. And that's why I think they finally decided to put Leo in the hot seat. And what Leo's going to do now, your guess is as good as mine, because we all know Leo is a PBC fighter, whereas Lee Wood, he's with Matchroom. I never expected that these two guys would share the same ring, would share the squared circle, and even now, I struggle.
The cheapest alternative for the PBC is to nip this in the bud, have Leo vacate the title in order to avoid a purse bid.
And I say in order to avoid a purse bid because the people over there at Matchroom are going to want to do that show. They're likely not too keen on sending Lee Wood over to the PBC. They'd rather bring Leo Santa Cruz over. And we all know that the PBC is not keen on sending their champions to other platforms.
Essentially what I'm getting at is if they can't reach a deal amongst themselves, it goes to a purse bid, at which point a bidding war will ensue and the fight will become more expensive to put on.
Irrespective of who places the winning bid, whether it's the PBC's Tom Brown or Eddie Hearn at Matchroom, the fight will become more expensive to put on than it was initially, because now what you're doing is ensuring that you beat out the other guy. You beat out the other promoter. In a scenario like that, the cheaper alternative
is to have Leo vacate the title and let him do the fight with Ray Vargas anyway.
It'll still be a title fight. It'll just be for Ray Vargas's WBC, since Leo ain't got the WBA anymore, though all the same. That's the cheaper alternative than fighting for Leo to keep that belt.
That's just one scenario, just one.
Though if he does decide to relinquish the WBA title to get out of this order to face Lee Wood, stay on his side of things and do that Ray Vargas fight anyway, if it happens that way, Lee Wood gets elevated to full WBA champion, at which point Eddie Hearn can do a unification match between Lee Wood and Josh Warrington, giving Matchroom 2 of the 4 Alphabet titles in the men's featherweight division. Ray Vargas has got the WBC, Top Rank's own Emmanuel Navarrete. He's got the WBO, and the other two, they'd be over there at Matchroom. Lee Wood versus Josh Warrington in the United Kingdom as a unification match is a commercially viable fight that could do very good business.
The question now is Leo going to keep that belt, or is he going to relinquish it within the next 24 hours?
Is the PBC going to do what they have to do to ensure that Leo stays a champion at featherweight, a division where he hasn't campaigned in 3.5 years, or are they going to go the easy route and simply surrender the title and put him in there with Ray Vargas anyway, because it's still a title fight? Your guess is as good as mine, but we'll find out within the next 24 hours what it is Leo Santa Cruz is going to do, assuming
more news doesn't break by the time this video is uploaded.
Will Leo Santa Cruz face Lee Wood? Will they pay Lee Wood to step aside, or will Leo Santa Cruz simply relinquish the WBA title and Lee Wood picks it up? We'll find out shortly. And finally, in men's lightweight and super lightweight news, some comments Ryan Garcia made ahead of his fight this past weekend with Javier Fortuna. He said, "I wouldn't be proud of being undisputed champion by beating George Kambosos.
But you're supposed to be proud that you beat Luke Campbell and Javier Fortuna.
A world championship title has eluded Ryan Garcia thus far throughout the Rising Fighter's 6-year career, or is it that Ryan Garcia is the one doing the eluding? But if you ask Garcia, being a boxing belt holder doesn't matter. You guys put too much emphasis on these belts. Let them go. They don't mean shit. Belts don't mean shit nowadays. Garcia told the DAZN Boxing Show, if I beat Devin Haney, they'll say now, go fight Tank.
Yeah, they probably would. If you beat Devin Haney now, that's what people might be saying after.
But the same is true in reverse. If you were to beat Gervonta Davis now, not that you're about to fight him now, you're not.
But if you did and you beat him, people would ask you to fight Devin Haney. The same is true in reverse.
If I beat Devin Haney, they'll say now, go fight Tank, Gervonta Davis. But if I beat Tank, they can't say shit.
Yes, they can, because Gervonta Davis hasn't beaten the top lightweights or top super lightweights.
He hasn't beaten anyone of note at 135 pounds. Rolly Romero, Isaac Cruz, Yuriorkis Gamboa, a very faded Yuriorkis Gamboa, who it took him 12 rounds to stop. He's done even less at 140 pounds at super lightweight. So where does Ryan Garcia get that he never has to fight anybody so long as he fights Tank? Not that he's about to fight Tank, because he isn't.
These are excuses.
These belts have no substance. It's like wearing a chain, but it's not heavy. It's not real. All that matters is that you beat the guy that matters, who everyone thinks you can't beat. Then you make a bunch of money. The money lasts, but the belts don't mean anything. We're in this game. It's called prize fighting. It's entertainment. You can put so much emphasis on these belts and make millions of comments. I don't care what anybody says. You can have millions of comments that say, oh, why don't you have a belt? But I have millions of dollars. When I was 8 years old, I said I wanted to be a pro and I wanted to make money. I never said I wanted to be an undisputed champion. My dream was to win gold.
My dream was to win a gold medal and make a bunch of money.
I wouldn't be proud to say I'm undisputed if I beat George Kambosos. I'm going to be proud once I beat everybody. But that's when I raise my head up high, said Garcia. Everywhere I walk in the street, not one time do they mention Devin Haney. Every day I get mentioned Tank Davis. If you don't think that I want to whoop that man the most so I can get my respect, that's what I'm coming for. I don't care about anything else.
No, you don't care now, but if you go your whole career having never had the luxury of calling yourself a world champion,
having that in common with the legends of old, like your mentor, Oscar De La Hoya, Bernard Hopkins, fighters like Sugar Ray Leonard, Sugar Ray Robinson, Floyd Mayweather, you know the drill.
He's only belittling the meaning and the prestige of being an undisputed champion or a champion overall because he doesn't want to have to fight Devin.
I mean, seriously, you've got time for Luke Campbell, you've got time for Javier Fortuna. If you do end up fighting Joseph Diaz, who Devin Haney already beat, what are you trying to convince the world of? That you have time for these fighters, but you don't have time for a champion. You don't have time for Devin.
Even if you don't care about his belts, there's still more of a demand for a Devin Haney fight than there is for any of those fights.
And unless you're about to fight Gervonta Davis, fighting Gervonta Davis is no excuse because it's not mutually exclusive. It's not either or. You can fight them both if you have the skills to beat them both.
Do you?